Hello, welcome to the blog that I'm doing here. This is Jeff Gentry with Communication Across the Ocean. Today I'm meeting with Tara Ross, who is a senior lecturer in journalism here at the University of Canterbury. And Tara, it's great to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about journalism and about the press in New Zealand. And so Tara, first, if you could introduce yourself a little bit to us by telling me what inspired you to pursue journalism as a career.
Goodness, that's going a long way back actually. I fell into it, to be honest. I'd always been encouraged to be a writer when I was at school, but I majored in history and travelled overseas for a good many years and came back 2 days before the deadline for this program at the University of Canterbury. So I chanced my arm, I just threw in an application and it went from there, and I've loved it.
Very good. And now professionally, you worked for several years in the newspaper industry here.
I did.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Entirely in the print industry, in the newspapers, and pretty much with one company actually. So I worked for the Press newspaper, which is the Christchurch daily newspaper, for about 8 years, and I worked for 3 years for the Sunday Star Times, which is the company's national weekly newspaper.
Right. And so what is Stuff?
Stuff is the unfortunate name that the company chose for its online presence. And it's unfortunate because they've lost the mastheads and they can't unravel it now because Stuff has become so popular and it is one of the biggest news websites in New Zealand. But it means nothing and it really doesn't have much relationship with the mastheads of the Fairfax group, so the Dominion Post and the Press and so on.
So like the Dominion Post, is that published in Auckland?
It's published in Wellington.
In Wellington,
Yeah.
okay. So the company owns several large newspapers around the country.
Most of them actually, so we're a duopoly pretty much in New Zealand, and Fairfax Media would own most of the major city newspapers in New Zealand apart from the Auckland newspaper, the New Zealand Herald.
All right, very good. Tell me, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. I don't know if it's like the airline. What are the Qantas Awards?
Qantas Awards, it's no longer the Qantas Awards actually. So the Qantas Awards are our print media and photographic awards. So magazine and newspaper pretty much. It's now the Canon Awards, I think.
Okay. Whereas the Axis are the broadcasting awards, or the advertising awards, right?
That would be the advertising awards. There is a separate award for broadcast, which has always been something of a joke, given that we had TV3 and TV1 and a handful of radio stations and nothing else. So it was a fairly select group. Everyone got an award pretty much.
Right, but tell me about the reason I ask about the Qantas Awards is that I can discern that you are a winner of a Qantas Award. Tell me about that.
I won awards for news feature writing for a couple of news features and for some of my reporting into Māori affairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I should say multiple Qantas Award winner. And so which one of those stories do you want to tell me just a little bit more about?
Crikey. The one that meant most, to me anyway, was the reporting in Māori affairs, because that's not an easy area to report on here. I guess it's similar to the States. Any minority group that you're reporting into, it's difficult. It's a difficult line to straddle between the interests of your mainstream newspaper and the back history of stereotyping and racism and previous coverage.
So what was that one of your investigative pieces?
It was.
And so what was that story about?
It was a tricky one because it, as they always are, aren't they? It was an issue looking at the local iwi or tribe here in Christchurch, and the gentleman who was responsible for the whakapapa.
Now, is this
unit.
the Ngā Tahu?
Ngā Tahu.
Okay.
So he was responsible for the whakapapa unit, and he decides who's in and who's out of the tribe. So can you prove your lineage back to the tribe, and that has an impact in terms of what money you're entitled to, various benefits, and mana really in terms of the tribe. He had been touting himself as Ngā Tahu, and in actual fact he wasn't, and I tried to write it as a bigger story about the difficulties of a legislative model that the government has imposed on iwi to determine who is Māori and who isn't, which doesn't fit easily with a cultural model of
right, and the iwi being like
whakapapa.
what we would call a tribe,
Yeah.
right? Okay, very interesting, good stuff. And so eventually you left the newspaper industry to come into higher education. So can you tell me a little bit about the journalism program here at University of Canterbury?
It's very small, it's quite boutique, and we're rebuilding it. So we've been closed for the last year after the earthquakes, and this is our first year of running the program again since then. So I'm not sure how much I can say, because other than having done the program many moons ago, I'm not the one who's been teaching it before now. So I've come in off the back of a program that's been in abeyance and getting it off the ground again. It's been enormous fun.
So what are your students working on right now?
They're in court today, actually. They're in learning how to cover court. Hopefully they have dressed appropriately, because they were given a lot of slack about that. So we're in this term, we're working very hard on the fundamentals of basic journalism, the ethics, the news gathering, spotting a news story, the news writing, and we'll move next term into some of the broadcast news.
Very good. So when your students are in court, in this case, it's okay. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
No, I did tell them they had to dress so that they didn't look like they were in the dock.
That's right. That's important. Okay, so you're working on print journalism right now, and then you told me that you're going to be moving into the broadcast area later. How soon is that?
Well, we have 4 6-week terms, so in the next 6-week block, they'll be working very much into radio, and the one after that we'll be working on TV, and subsequent to that we'll be coming back to tie it all together to work a lot more with a web focus.
Oh, great. So you're doing print, then radio, then TV, then convergent media, I guess.
And the print underpins throughout the year, so they'll have print assignments and news stories that they're filing all through the year as well. But we're trying to staircase the skills through.
Excellent. And the way that you're taking that, the order you're doing that, would you say that is a reflection on how media are converging between print, broadcast, and everything else?
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about how that's taking place here in New Zealand.
It's probably slower here, but certainly within the print media, which is my background, journalists now are in the branches. Certainly they're sent out with iPads, and they're required to shoot the first video, shoot the first photo. They have to know how to file and stitch that together as a package. They're probably not responsible yet for graphics and coming up with pulling those packages together, but I don't think that that's far away. There's a little more working in teams, and they're hiring graphic designers now to actually work with reporters to stitch that into the reporting from the earliest stages. And all Fairfax reporters now are sent out with iPhones so that they can do the same. They're shooting photo, they're shooting video, they're expected to capture some audio. Broadcast are a little different. They're not working so much in that way, but I think they'll need to. There's a little less pressure on broadcast to move into the web journalism, when it's web journalism that's driving the convergence. But the broadcast numbers, aren't in as much free fall as the print audience numbers, so they're feeling a little more cushion from having to go that way. Right.
Wow, that you just said so much. I think some of our viewers are going to replay that last answer several times, because in America we're encountering convergent media all over, to where even newspaper reporters are shooting video to go up on the web. So if you were going to create an undergraduate journalism, or we could call it communications program, media program for practitioners in news, what kinds of elements, what kinds of skills do you think, and maybe even imagine in the United States if you can, but what sorts of technical skills, aside from being a really well-educated person who can communicate, what kinds of technical skills would you recommend for our students back in Oklahoma?
They need to be, and what I'm trying to push with my own students is they need to not be afraid of technology. And it's not necessarily a question of which technology you master, but you need to be prepared to try it. So I'm getting my students to dabble in social media. They have to be adept at finding new apps and new tools and hunting with them and learning how to play with them. So they're playing on their phones, and they might have a smartphone or they might not, but they need to know how to take good photos on whichever tool they're using. So it's about bringing the fundamental journalism skills, how to tell a story, and whether you're telling that visually or in print, and knowing whatever tool you're using really well, and also knowing how to bring the latest app to enhance it even further. I think the biggest skill that people need is to be open to change and to constant learning. I mean, my students will come out at the end of this program, at the end of this year, and there will be the next new Tumblr, the next new Twitter, the next new whatever tool, and they will need to know how to pick it up, play with it, and use it.
That is wonderful. Tara Ross has been our guest today on Communication Across the Ocean. I'm Jeff Gentry. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks very much.
We'll see you again.